This is only one of the many existential dilemmas presented during the duration of Final Fantasy IX, a game full of warmth, color, and life, but simultaneously despair, darkness, and death. It would be the last title in the series to be produced by the series creator, Hironobu Sakaguchi, before his departure from Square Enix. Fittingly, Final Fantasy IX grasps at questions concerning our mortality, what it means to truly live, why life matters, and how to come to terms with what limited time we're granted. Each character in the RPG story faces challenges to their identities that prompt them to ultimately change and grow into better versions of themselves. This video should be taken as a collection of essays that will focus on 3 such cases: Vivi, Kusha, and Zidane. By its conclusion, I hope you have a better grasp on how existentialism permeates Final Fantasy IX's narrative and how this RPG can inspire you or anyone else feeling lost in life. This is Vivi. He starts as a relatively blank state when you first meet him. After gaining consciousness, he was raised for only 6 months by a man of a completely different race, a Q named Quan, before that father-like figure died. He knew very little about the outside world, very little about who or what he even was, and it really shows when we first control the mage in the Grand Kingdom of Alexandria. Vivi had come here to watch a once-a-year play, I Want to Be Your Canary, courtesy of the Tantalus theater trope. He finds out almost immediately, however, that the ticket he had bought is a fake. He does eventually get into the show for free by agreeing to be a slave to the juvenile Burmesian Puck, though without actually knowing what a slave is. And then he accidentally gets roped into the performance and later kidnapping of Alexandria's princess, Garnet till Alexandros XVII, to be shortened to Garnet for the rest of this video. Vivi is the equivalent of a little kid at the start of Final Fantasy IX. Shy, innocent, clumsy, but curious. It doesn't actually take too long though for certain truths to be uncovered and to completely shake up his character. See, as strange as it sounds, Garnet welcomed being kidnapped. She needed to escape to a nearby kingdom, Limblum, out of concern for her warmongering mother, Queen Braun. Our main protagonist, Zidane, a member of the performing troupe, had agreed to take her there. Vivi and the princess's loyal knight, Steiner, had tagged along, the latter with much reluctance. On the way to Limblum, the party arrives in the small town of Dali. What seems like an ordinary pit stop quickly becomes a grim eye-opener for them. For below the modest houses and vibrant fields is a factory mass-producing weapons of war. But not your ordinary spears or swords or guns. Instead, golems capable of some of the most destructive magic known to the world. Black mages as they were called, the same thing that Vivi was. How would you feel if you found out that you weren't special? That you were nothing but a tool meant to be discarded as soon as your makers were done with you? Do you even exist at that point? I want to reiterate that Vivi is just a child at this point in the game. He knows little in the way of social interactions, little in the way of complex feelings and hardships, bar the passing of Quan. To have such a world-changing revelation dropped on him so soon shakes him to his very core to the point where he's despondent for some time. How do you prove that you exist? This is what is written over the Mage's introduction on Final Fantasy IX's menu screen, and best describes his struggle here. The party does what they can to reassure him, telling him that he is very much his own person and that they would never see anything else. But Vivi has his own doubts. He knows now that he wasn't born, he was created. Everywhere he goes, he's harassed for being a black mage. And he witnesses firsthand as the mindless golems lay waste to Limblum, also commit genocide in Clara and Burmecia, 2 otherwise peaceful kingdoms. Vivi feels like he doesn't belong with those around him. Essence precedes existence was coined by ancient Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle as a mechanistic explanation to nature. The concept that everything has some sort of essence, or in other words, some specific characteristic that defines what it is. A dagger, for example, is a dagger because of its short blade relative to a sword. The 17th century philosopher René Descartes' dualism that the mind or soul is separate from the body, and empiricism, although taking their own approach to nature, still posited a sense of teleology. A knight, for example, is intended to be the valiant protector of their ruler until the bitter end. Sure, Vivi may be different from the other black mages. He's actually conscious and possesses a seemingly benevolent consciousness at that. But is the fact that he is one of them nonetheless an inescapable ultimatum on who he is or who he will be? This existential dread gets compounded towards the middle of Disc 2. At this point, the party has reason to believe that a mysterious sorcerer, Kusha, might be manipulating Braun. The man had been found to be responsible for supplying the queen her army of black mages. As such, the party ventured out to the outer continent in hopes to find him. They ended up discovering a village of black mages who, like Vivi, had gained consciousness. Vivi is nervously thrilled to learn that there are marks just like him and that this group had chosen to defect from the war. The moment serves as some validation for him and his sense of self, that he might actually be different from what he was conceived to be. But this knowledge does not come without burden. Vivi learns that some of his brethren have stopped moving and have been buried in a cemetery on a quiet hill in the village. The night of the party's arrival, he seeks Black Mage number 288 for answers. I have friends who have voiced to me their fear of death. They are scared of not being able to experience everything life has to offer, or of not being able to leave a meaningful impact on the world and being forgotten. These are perfectly valid feelings that most people, including me, think about from time to time. I find some relief in the fact that I likely have many decades ahead of me to sort these things out. I can't imagine how I would feel if that period were suddenly reduced to a single year. Does it make sense for Vivi to cope with the ramifications of his existence when it is going to be so short-lived? To toil over whether or not he is a trivial weapon or a sentient being? To also find purpose in his life should he somehow resolve the former? It's a convoluted issue. Yet, ironically, I find that this moment is the most indicative of Vivi's personage. The fact that he is capable of understanding such a complex situation and that he is affected by it proves his individualism. Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Soren Kierkegaard, a philosopher heralded as the father of existentialism, writes in the concept of anxiety. What he means to say is that to exist means to live in a world devoid of meaning. To exist means to be free to make a choice in lieu of the former. Anxiety is the byproduct of this fact, as it is easy to fear what one choice might entail over the others. Even so, the fact that you are subject to it proves that you are your own person. These are among the core tenets of existentialism echoed by successors to Kierkegaard. Applying this to Final Fantasy IX, Vivi is shaken by the decision he has to make, but can be seen as a free being as a result, rather than as a weapon like he loathes. The only thing that would revoke him of that status is indecision, stagnation. Zidane puts it best when he talks to the mage at a later point on the outer continent. Vivi ultimately makes his choice to continue living, and he ends up evolving into a beautiful person. We see him first showcase more complex emotions. When Braun is mortally wounded in a battle against Kusha, for example, Garnet finds her and listens to her final words. We learn that the queen wasn't manipulated at all, that she had been blinded by greed. Yet, in her final moments, she apologizes to Garnet and hopes that her daughter can become a better ruler than herself. Vivi watches conflicted. He feels happy that Braun, who had caused him and his friends so much trauma, is now dead. At the same time though, he understands how much the woman meant to Garnet as a mother and sheds tears for the girl. Later on, when all eyes fall upon Kusha, the party returns to Black Mage Village and finds many of the Black Mages who have disappeared. Black Mage number 288 is one of the few to remain and tells Vivi that his brethren, like him, finally learned of their mortality. Unlike the Little Mage, however, they chose to return to Kusha's side under the promise that he could and would extend their lives. The news infuriates Vivi. The Little Mage already hated Kusha for all the atrocities he enabled. Now the Sorcerer was manipulating his kind into unjust servitude. In Existentialism is a Humanism, Jean-Paul Sartre discusses a problem one of his friends had brought to him in the time he was writing the work. Said friend had recently lost his brother to the German offense of 1940. Wishing to avenge him, he had planned to enroll in the Free French forces. He would, however, be leaving his mother, who had recently parted ways with his father on account of the latter cheating. Doing so would certainly drive her into depression. Sartre's friend was at odds. He could serve a greater purpose of aiding his nation, albeit likely having a minimal effect on it. Alternatively, he could dramatically better the life of one individual at the cost of a more grandiose calling. Both choices had their own merits and pitfalls. Sartre would argue that, whichever one his friend took, it would be valid because it would reflect on who the boy truly wanted to be. The choice made by the Black Mages is obviously the inverse of that of Vivi's upon being presented with the looming presence of death. But I don't think we should shame them for their actions. Sure, Vivi's choice may seem more admirable, but his brother's responses are fair. To simply desire more time, especially in a situation where they only just became privy to its finiteness. Though one must ask that, in offering themselves to someone else, essentially becoming a slave to that other, does it really matter that they will have a longer life? The Black Mages are shown to grapple with this question as time passes. Unfortunately, they don't quite get to answer it themselves given Kusha quickly abandons them. Regardless, Vivi helps them return to their village, sharing with them his own experiences in an attempt to console them. He has hope that they will eventually be able to assimilate into the world as he had. Finally, when the party discovers the existence of Terra, an alternative planet from which many of their lingering mysteries stem from, they meet a race known as the Genomes in Brandball. Clones designed to be vessels for long-past souls of their world. Clones that know little of the world bar their upbringing in this secluded sanctuary. Kusha, due to an event I will discuss shortly, sets out to destroy Terra. Before the ground can collapse and lay waste to the lingering civilization, however, Vivi leaves the front to rescue the Genomes. He commands his friends to help him in this effort, fully in control of himself and what he believes in. When the party escapes back to their home planet, Vivi brings his new acquaintances to Black Mage Village, recognizing the parallels between them and his people and what they can do for one another. He then joins his friends to stop Kusha, wishing to be by their side for as long as he still has left, to also ensure that the many lives after him that have yet to even exist have their chance to learn what it means to truly be as he had. Earlier, I had mentioned how the Greeks believed in essence precedes existence. Many philosophers would later come to refute that. To reference Sartre's Existentialism as a humanism again, he writes, "Existence precedes essence." You exist before being defined by anything, and it is up to you to shape who you want to be. Once a naive child with little knowledge of the world around him, Vivi understands his own existence. He isn't an object to be tossed around, he isn't a weapon to be commanded, he is his own person by the end of Final Fantasy IX. Bold, knowledgeable, confident, he is unique because of the memories he's made and the bonds he's formed throughout this wondrous journey. Even after he passes, these things will immortalize him beyond his death. This is Kusha, Final Fantasy IX's primary villain, albeit one sometimes misunderstood. Most players recognize him only for his narcissistic character and his cruel actions, not realizing the root of it all. It's not hard to see why. As alluded to in the previous section, the Sorcerer is a shadow behind the curtain for almost the entirety of the first half of the game. He doesn't make his debut until Disc 2 when Zidane, Vivi, and Freya are defeated in the Kingdom of Clara, and even then does little other than stare at our fallen heroes. Later, Regent Cid, ruler of Limblum, discerns Kusha as Queen Bronze's weapons manufacturer, which causes the party to hunt him under the belief he is perpetuating Alexandria's conquest for power. He gets more involved in the story afterwards, but even with all the damage we watch the Sorcerer cause, the decimation of Braun and her fleet, the destruction of Garnet City, and the capture of Zidane's friends, we aren't given much in the way of his motivations, bar some vague lines. At the end of Disc 3, all is revealed. The party has made their way to Terra, a sister planet to the one we've become familiar with, Gaia. They discover that the former is in the process of assimilating with the latter by replacing Gaian souls with its own. Zidane talks with the leader of this effort, Garland, and discovers that Kusha was actually created. The Sorcerer, secretly an early version of the Xeno population, was intended to promote violence on Gaia to accelerate the aforementioned process. The fact that he was made as an adult with no childhood, though, limited his abilities and made him erratic. Thus, Garland created a second genome to eventually replace him. Given this information, Kusha's actions can be recontextualized as a mix of jealousy and appeasement rather than or in addition to just pure evil. The Sorcerer wanted to prove to his master that he was better than his successor and to prevent his unruly reinstatement. Later, Kusha kills Garland. He achieves the world's ultimate power, Trance, and declares that he will rule over Terra and Gaia. This is when an unfathomable truth is spoiled to him, one that he had not been privy to before, that he will soon die. Ironically, like the Black Mages he had created, Kusha had been conferred a limited lifespan as a failsafe for a situation like this. The Sorcerer naturally is taken aback by the revelation. Soon, in a fit of rage, he begins razing everything to the ground, believing nothing should be allowed to live on without him, leading the game into its final arc. When I claim that Kusha is a misunderstood villain, I want to make it clear that I am not defending his actions whatsoever. All of them, bar one that I have yet to bring up, are inhumane and cruel. He isn't as one-dimensional as many might argue, however. He serves as a strong foil to Vivi and the soon-to-be-talked-about Zidane. This is because, unlike them, Kusha was not aware of his existence for the vast majority of his livelihood, and hence was never free. As hinted at when talking about our favorite little mage, existence through the existentialist eye describes an individual's unbridled, untethered presence in the world. Man is the future of man, the 20th century poet Francis Ponge writes. Because life lacks any true meaning, a person is not bound to any particular role or mission. They are hence free to make their own choices. Kusha, however, had been branded with a purpose as soon as he came to be. He was Garland's soldier, a harbinger of death and destruction until his eventual replacement. He knew nothing else and had no other option but to strive towards the conclusion already written in his name. In a sense, Kusha's situation mirrors the dissatisfaction that atheist-leaning philosophers like Albert Camus felt towards religion. The 20th century absurdist, in his work The Myth of Sisyphus, elaborates on the concept of the absurd, essentially the eventual acknowledgement that life is pointless and how to deal with it. He reminisces how one of his predecessors, a name we briefly brought up earlier, Søren Kierkegaard, found a remedy in blind faith to God. Camus rationalizes why Kierkegaard believed this. There is of course some sense of sanctuary in believing in some higher power or principle. Suddenly, actions or events that an individual cannot explain can be attributed to this external force. Life's meaning becomes whatever God intends it to be. But Camus found this mindset ultimately limiting on how it confronts the absurd. To believe some otherworldly figure might dictate who you should be in life or is at the cause of what happens during life's course can gravely influence how you view and shape your path moving forward. For example, a person may choose one profession over another they enjoy more under the belief that they were created for the former. In reality, they could have easily embodied the latter. Another person might be too cowardly to talk to others and conceive that this is due to their inherently cowardly nature. In reality, they are perfectly capable of socializing if so they please. Camus, unlike other philosophers from his time, thought it best to simply move past the need to find meaning in life and to just live as is. A matter of persisting, to live without appeal. In bringing these points up, I'm not trying to associate Kusha with religion, nor am I trying to discount those of you that are religious in any way. Rather, I'm trying to apply the rationale behind Camus' disappointment here to reinforce the pitfalls of the sorcerer's constricted existence. As faith in a god might skew the perception of the ordinary man, Garland's label of Kusha created a funnel for his actions. The sorcerer could not see beyond the path laid before him, and so followed it without second thought. As a counter-argument, you might bring up how Vivi was also designed as a weapon of war. Why did he not defer to the same condition as Kusha? Well, recall that the little mage was not aware of his making for some time. He had a chance to grow up and explore his existence, in the process formulating a sense of who he wanted to be. By the time his true identity and the ramifications of it became apparent to him, Vivi had already seen other tangible options. He had a sense that he didn't necessarily have to embody his heritage, and there was certainly no one forcing him to do so, and the journey that results is built upon that fact. On the other hand, Kusha never experienced what it was like to be a kid. He never experienced what it was like to manifest his own opinions or make his own choices while under Garland's grasp. Both characters' understanding of their existence was fundamentally different and thus bore vastly different fruit. Earlier in this section, I'd referred to one event Kusha had brought about that could be considered as not inhumane. It happens after the party defeats the sorcerer. They are faced with the embodiment of existential dread itself, Necron, who acknowledges man's fear of death. It wishes to revert everything to a zero world, an utter nothingness where such discourse would no longer permeate. It is true that the party holds the feeling Necron describes. Even so, they choose to fight the apparition and beat it. Necron disappears, though acknowledges that it will always linger so long as there is life and death. Even so, it is surprised by the party's profound will to live and deters from its original plan. Kusha, his energy fading, ends up saving everyone from the disintegrating ethereal plane they had descended to. When the party makes it back to Gaia, Zidane finds and comforts the sorcerer in his last moments, this dialogue on screen playing. Some players have found the scene confusing and or take offense to it in that it appears to be an abrupt 180 in Kusha's character. After all the crimes the sorcerer had committed, he seemingly has a cheap redemption that better suits the happy ending detailed in the epilogue. I'd argue there's actually more to this event. This scene acts as a resolution of Kusha's struggles. After the sorcerer is defeated, as he puts it, he had nothing left, nothing more to lose. I take this to mean that the worldview that was pushed on him by Garland was shattered. He could no longer uphold it and consequently was no longer restricted by it. His last moments occur in a state where he simply is as he is, another ordinary being in the world around him rather than anything more or anything less. As Kusha watches our heroes take on Necron, knowing well how impossible the odds are, he realizes what it means to choose for oneself, what it means to be free, and, by extension, what it means to exist. His actions to later save the party are his first and last independent choice, his brief try at what life really amounts to. Kusha is very much still a villain, but to me, he is a tragic villain. He would never have been able to understand what life was until he was beaten, but by then, it was too late for him to take part in its grace. This is Zidane. Unlike Vivi when you first meet him, he has a decent grasp of who he is. A laid-back rascal, an amateur flirt, though above all, a loyal friend to those he cares about. The thief is the first character we ever get to control when starting a Final Fantasy IX playthrough. We watch him traverse the MS Prima Vista, join his comrades in a small brawl with their boss, Baku, and plan out the kidnapping of Alexandria's Princess Garnet. Later, as the play they're using as a distraction for the latter begins, Zidane bumps into the princess and is stunned by her beauty. When the girl makes it onto the ship and admits she wishes to be kidnapped for reasons alluded to in Vivi's section, he accepts this unexpected request in a scene framed as if it were set on a stage. Coming off of the fractured mind of Final Fantasy VII's Cloud Strife, the suppressed trauma of Final Fantasy VIII's Squallian Heart, it's tempting to suspect Zidane is hiding some part of himself from those around him and from the player. But as the game continues to move forward, the thief's personality appears to stay resolute. When Vivi discovers that he was manufactured rather than born, Zidane is quick to try and dispel his concerns about his existence. When Freya travels to Clara in an attempt to stop Queen Braun from killing her people, Zidane ignores her calls to have her go alone, believing as her friend he should help her through her struggles. When Garnet is imprisoned by her mother, Zidane drops everything to lead the charge and bring her back to safety. There is a moment where the thief breaks down, seeing the princess unconscious, having had her powers to conduct summoning magic stripped from her. But this is presented less as an allusion to some hidden past event of his, and more so as his genuine disappointment in himself to protect her. At the focal point of late 19th century existentialist Friedrich Nietzsche's thus spoke Zarathustra is a message of how the solution to life's ambiguity is to be authentic to yourself. The protagonist, Zarathustra, comes down from his solitude in the highest mountains to boldly proclaim God is dead. Instead, the Superman shall prevail over the world, essentially a human capable of creating their own values, of embracing life, and of overcoming the lack of a higher guiding figure to follow and put faith into. The concept is a culmination of Nietzsche's long struggle with his religious childhood and the discovery of and attempt to cope with nihilism. For all intents and purposes, Zidane appears to be embodying Zarathustra's dogma, fully aware of his existence and what he wants to make out of it. This changes slightly when the party travels to Black Mage Village. Ironically, around the same time Vivi learns about his mortality, Zidane tells Garnet about his past to prove his empathy for the little mage. We discover that he was an orphan adopted by Baku. He knew nothing about his actual parents, about his original home he grew up in, or where he was even born. One day, he had set out on a journey to find these answers, only to return with nothing. He ended up coming to love the family that took him in. Though not an earth-shattering revelation, this information allows us to frame Zidane in a different light than before. On the one hand, we can take his stoic personality that we've become accustomed to up until this point as a show of acceptance. Acceptance that the thief may never find his true home or his true parents, but that, to him, this is okay. He has learned to move past these thoughts, to accept that the people around him are all the family that he'll ever need, and to become a leading figure for others who feel lost lest they feel the same way he had back then. On the other hand, Zidane's character can now be seen as a byproduct of insecurity. Maybe he hasn't truly come to accept his circumstances. A part of him is still an empty void that has yet to be filled. He indiscriminately supports the identities of others because he doesn't have one himself. The first interpretation is still in line with the existentialist concepts that we've covered. Zidane is choosing to relinquish his history and be who he believes he should be. He isn't trying to suppress any part of him, instead coming to terms with what he lacks. The second interpretation is the opposite. Even if the thief isn't aware of it, he is subconsciously suppressing his own person by falsifying an inclination to those around him. For if Zidane is made solely of the people around him but not himself, if those people were to suddenly disappear, so would he. Disc 3 adds more fuel to the flame. At one point, Kusha has captured the entire party, using their lives as blackmail against Zidane to force him to retrieve an artifact from an ancient structure, Oilivert. When the thief arrives at the location with a few party members that the sorcerer allows him, he finds himself capable of reading the bizarre language on the structure's walls. Those he brings with him cannot. Eventually, Zidane frees his friends and they pursue Kusha to the neighboring planet of Terra. For a while, the player has taken the thief's tale for granted. Though they haven't seen anyone else with the same feature during the adventure, the puzzle is pushed at the back of their mind due to its lack of focus. On Terra, however, Zidane spots a girl that looks to be the same species as him. He follows her and ends up in Brandball, a city full of people with tales identical to his own, genomes as they are called. He is shaken for the duration the party spends here, acting far from his normal cheery self. Seeking answers for the many questions brewing in his mind, he confronts the black-clad Garland. I had already spoiled parts of this conversation during my discussion of Kusha, how Final Fantasy IX's villain was really just a construct intended to enact the merging of Terra and Gaia, how Garland wasn't satisfied with the Sorcerer and had made a replacement for him. I purposely left out some information though. See, Zidane was that replacement. Like Kusha, he was not born. He was fabricated by Garland's own hands. He was a genome just as all the others he had come across. He belonged to Terra. At first, Zidane argues back. He cites the many memories that he's made with the people of Gaia, and the many more he still has yet to make. Going back to those two ways by which you can frame the thief after Black Mage Village, this can either be taken as an act of valiance or an act of disbelief. Regardless, Zidane promises to be Garland's Angel of Death, taunting the title bestowed by his creator. When Garland imprisons him, however, he falls apart, and it's not hard to see why. Imagine being told your entire life is a lie, or to call upon a potentially more relatable situation, imagine being told that whatever you're passionate about isn't what you should be doing, that pursuing a grand dream of yours is a helpless facade, and that there are better things you could be doing with your time. I had already asked you similar questions while talking about Vivi. Zidane had finally had one of his most sought-after questions answered, only to discover that it essentially undoes the existence he had carved out for himself. He wasn't meant to become friends with all the people he did across his journey, he was supposed to lead them to their deaths. And perhaps he still managed to do that by bringing them all here. The sequence that follows is undeniably one of the most iconic of Final Fantasy IX's entire runtime. Zidane wakes up and is freed by Vivi and Aiko, yet he brushes away their attempts to help him, wishing to shoulder the pain he feels both physically and mentally alone. The thief not only feels guilty for the state that they are in, of being dragged into this conflict that he should have been the root of, but also believes that they shouldn't have to waste their own time on his personal crisis. In a way, he is still showing care for them in his disillusioned state. Zidane then gets into two separate battles against creatures roaming the grounds. Freya and Amarant join him for the first. Steiner and Kina join him for the second. The thief still pushes his friends away under the same pretense. At last, Zidane comes across an unsightly beast much larger than himself. It delivers him a near fatal blow, leaving his HP at 1. Suddenly, Garnet steps in to save him. She defeats the enemy with him and finally breaks through his act. As we've discussed, though existentialism is primarily a statement on what the individual human constitutes and what one should do to that end, I would argue that it does leave room for concepts like friendship and camaraderie to exist. Life is meaningless, God is dead. As such, man finds himself the sole determinant of his destiny, as we've said. But if all men are ascribed the same circumstance, I see nothing to stop them from helping one another, so long as they do not obstruct one another's freedoms or pursuit of value. This video sought only to talk about the stories of Vivi, Kusha, and Zidane, who are but a fraction of Final Fantasy IX's entire cast. Everyone else you were introduced to, as I had alluded to in the introduction, bar Kina, who is sort of a foil to them all, faces their own existential dilemmas. Aiko had been the last of her village and was dealing with the possibility she might be alone forever. Freya for many years had lost her lover, and finding him again earlier in the story was ironically faced with his amnesia. Amarant had always acted on his own and was under the belief that teamwork was trivial in light of his capabilities. Steiner had been blind to his loyalty to Queen Braun and was ignoring the threats against Garnet's life. And Garnet herself had been torn between two visions for her identity: the princess she had grown up as and needed to be for Alexandria, and whatever it meant to just be herself. Zidane played a huge role in each of these individuals overcoming their misgivings. He gives Aiko a family to be a part of. He inspires Freya with hope for a new beginning. He teaches Amarant about how satisfying it can be to work with others. He shows Steiner that he can be more than a pawn following orders. And he offers Garnet the space to forge her own path once she deems herself ready. Zidane is the beating heart of the party, and so it is only fair that, at his lowest point, the party restores his own heart in return. It is with this renewed strength that our heroes finish the remainder of their journey. They stop Garland, they stop Kusha. In the face of Necron threatening the end of existence itself, Zidane stands up in defiance. He, like those collapsed around him, had been victim to the quandaries of life. Though he managed to solve some of them during this journey, he acknowledges he may still be subject to more as he continues forward. It might be of some relief to him then to allow Necron to do what it wants to do. Yet, Zidane believes that everyone deserves the chance to overcome their own challenges, to find their own meaning. Sure, he had felt pain on account of the obstacles that he had faced, but he had become a better person as a result. He had made friends that would support him wherever he went. He had forged new memories that illuminated his existence and that would persevere past his absence. Others should have that same opportunity. In taking down Necron, Zidane has become Nietzsche's Superman. Someone now in complete understanding of who he is and where his values lay. Someone who does not cower in existentialist dread, but embraces it as a motivator to keep going. When the curtain finally begins to close on this play, our protagonist is awarded the happy ending he deserves. Final Fantasy IX is a game about wizards, knights, mages, monsters, faraway kingdoms, and even further away planets. But it is ultimately a game about life. Through Vivi, Kusha, and Zidane, really all of the characters we're introduced to, we're reminded about how meaningless existence can be, and yet the beauty in making the most out of the freedom it allows. Regardless of what people tell you, regardless of where you come from, you are in control of your destiny. You can become whatever you want, whoever you want, by your own hands. And you can find people to join you on that journey who will uplift you and remember you forever. Whether this was producer Sakaguchi's intent for his last addition to the Final Fantasy series is debatable, but it is tempting to speculate so. The fact that he has gone on record to say 9 is his favorite game is at least telling of the passion he had infused into his work. At the very least, these are the messages I had found when playing the RPG, and why I consider it to also be my favorite in the franchise, that is out of the 3 I've played. This isn't to say that you have to give Final Fantasy IX a shot if you haven't already, though hopefully the concepts the game put forward are enough to inspire you to some degree, as it did me. Thank you all for watching.